Hey guys, tonight we're going to dim the lights, perhaps turn on a soft fan, and dive into a world where ingenuity met, well, let's just say, less than stellar results. Imagine yourself back in ancient Rome, bustling with chariot traffic and the scent of olives and something decidedly less pleasant, and you're about to encounter some of the most bewildering, frustrating, and downright ineffective inventions ever conceived by a supposedly brilliant civilization. We're talking about things that, honestly, if you were relying on them, you probably wouldn't make it to next Tuesday. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on a dusty Roman road, the sun beating down, and a distinct smell of, well, it's best not to dwell on it. You're about to witness firsthand some of the Roman Empire's less-than-stellar moments. A parade of historical blunders that, while perhaps amusing in hindsight, were anything but for the poor souls who had to endure them. We often romanticize the Romans, picturing magnificent aqueducts, mighty legions, and ingenious engineering. And yes, they did accomplish incredible feats. But tonight, we're peeling back the gilded veneer to reveal the truly terrible, the laughably impractical, and the just plain awful inventions that, against all odds, someone somewhere thought was a good idea. Let's start with the grand ambitions of warfare, because what better place to begin than with the tools designed to conquer the world? You might picture the Roman legionary, clad in lorica segmentata, shield held high, a gladius at the ready, a picture of efficiency and power, right? But what about the tools behind that legionary? The ones designed to give them an edge, but instead just didn't imagine, if you will, the Helepolis, a siege tower of epic proportions. You're thinking, wow, a massive movable fortress. That sounds intimidating. And it was, in theory. This thing was absolutely gargantuan, sometimes reaching heights of 100 feet, with multiple levels packed with archers and ballistae. It was designed to roll right up to enemy walls, allowing Roman soldiers to storm over the top. Sounds impressive, doesn't it? Except for one crucial detail, it was so incredibly heavy, often weighing in at over 150 tons, that moving it was an absolute nightmare. You see it now. A monstrous wooden edifice creaking and groaning, being dragged by hundreds, sometimes even thousands, of men and oxen. The ground beneath it groans, literally, as it sinks into soft soil, gets stuck in muddy patches, or simply collapses any makeshift ramps. You can almost feel the sweat stinging your eyes as you strain alongside the Roman engineers, pushing and pulling, only to find the entire operation grinding to a halt because a wheel has sunken into the earth up to its axle. The very design that made it so formidable, its sheer size and weight, also made it practically immobile in many real-world scenarios. Historians still debate whether the Helepolis was more of a psychological weapon than a practical one, terrifying enemies by its mere appearance, only to become a giant, immobile target once the battle truly began. It was a lumbering behemoth, a testament to Roman ambition, but often a monument to their logistical frustrations. You can almost hear the sighs of exasperation from the legion commanders as they watched their grand siege engine bog down, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. And then there's the story of the Roman fire engine. Now, you're picturing something grand, right? A powerful pump, maybe a hose, something that could actually put out a decent blaze in a sprawling city built largely of wood. Think again. The Roman siphon, their version of a fire pump, was essentially a large syringe. You see men working it. Two people pushing a plunger back and forth in a cylinder, trying to create enough pressure to squirt a pathetic stream of water. It was cumbersome, inefficient, and frankly, almost useless against anything more than a small, smoldering ember. Imagine your house is on fire, smoke billowing out the windows, and these guys show up with what looks like an oversized squirt gun. You'd probably just grab a bucket and run to the nearest well yourself. The sheer futility of it must have been soul-crushing for the vigils. Rome's early firefighters. They were brave, dedicated men, but armed with such inadequate tools. Their efforts often amounted to little more than damage control after a fire had already devastated entire blocks. A common historical fact is that Roman cities, despite their advanced engineering in other areas, were notoriously prone to devastating fires. And with tools like the siphon, it's not hard to see why. You can almost hear the crackling of the flames, the shouts of despair, as yet another Roman insula went up in smoke. The fire engine standing by, making little more than a soggy puddle. But the military blunders weren't just about large machines. Sometimes, it was about the smaller, seemingly ingenious ideas that just didn't pan out. Consider the Corvus, a boarding bridge designed for naval warfare. In the First Punic War, the Romans were terrible at sea. They were landlubbers, and the Carthaginians were master sailors. So, the Romans, ever the pragmatists, invented this massive spiked gangplank. You're on a Roman quinquereme, waves splashing against the hull, and suddenly, a massive wooden beam with a giant spiked hook at the end swings out from your ship, crashing onto the deck of an enemy vessel. The idea was brilliant: turn a sea battle into a land battle. And it worked. For a while, it allowed Roman legionaries to cross onto enemy ships and fight hand to hand, negating the Carthaginian superior seamanship. But here's the problem, and you're feeling it now as your ship starts to list dangerously in the choppy waters. The Corvus was incredibly heavy. It sat on a pivot at the bow of the ship, adding significant top heaviness and instability. You feel the ship sway violently with every wave, the heavy timber of the Corvus amplifying the motion. A little-known detail about the Corvus is that while it helped the Romans win early naval victories, it also led to a significant number of shipwrecks during storms. As the ships became dangerously unstable, imagine the terror of being caught in a gale, the waves towering over you, and your ship, already struggling, is weighed down by this enormous, unwieldy plank that acts like a giant sail, catching every gust of wind and threatening to capsize you. The very device meant to give you victory at sea also made you incredibly vulnerable to the sea itself. It was a technological gamble that paid off in battles but exacted a heavy toll in ship losses. A classic example of an invention being brilliant in concept, but flawed in execution. The academic debate still rages among historians as to whether the strategic advantages of the Corvus outweighed its significant structural drawbacks and the resulting loss of Roman vessels. You clench your fists, feeling the spray on your face, knowing that your victory in battle might lead to your watery grave in the next storm. Beyond the battlefield, Roman innovation took some truly bizarre turns in the realm of daily life. You might imagine opulent baths, elaborate mosaics, and delicious feasts. But even here, convenience often came with a side of utter frustration. Let's talk about Roman roads. For instance, you picture the Appian Way, straight as an arrow, perfectly paved. And many were truly magnificent feats of engineering that still stand today. But imagine being a Roman traveler, not on one of the main arteries, but on a secondary road, or a local path. You're trying to get from one village to another, perhaps carrying a few amphorae of wine, or a basket of fresh produce. You're expecting a smooth journey. Instead, you find yourself navigating what can only be described as a Roman rural nightmare. The roads were often little more than rutted tracks, prone to becoming muddy quagmires in the rain or choking dust bowls in the dry season. And while the Romans were masters of concrete and stone, they weren't always consistent. You'd find stretches of perfectly paved road abruptly ending, giving way to rough, uneven terrain. You feel every jarring bump as your cart rattles over loose stones, threatening to overturn your precious cargo. and the drainage, often non-existent. You're splashing through puddles that could swallow a small child, your feet sinking into thick, slimy mud. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a significant hindrance to trade and travel for the common Roman. The contrast between the grand imperial highways and these often neglected local routes highlights a fascinating inconsistency in Roman infrastructure. You can almost hear the curses of the local farmers, trying to transport their goods to market on these treacherous pathways, a far cry from the majestic images of Roman roads we hold in our minds. Then there's the matter of Roman entertainment, specifically, the public spectacles. You think of the Colosseum, gladiators, chariot races, lions, and yes, those were undeniably grand. But what about the more everyday forms of entertainment? Like, say, Roman board games. You're sitting in a bustling tavern, the air thick with the smell of cheap wine and stale bread, and you decide to pass the time with a game. You're picturing something like chess, perhaps, or checkers, something intellectually stimulating or at least mildly engaging. Instead, you're presented with a game of duodecim scripta, an ancestor of backgammon. Now, before you dismiss it, it's not the game itself that's the problem, but the sheer lack of standardized rules or clear scoring. You roll the dice, move your pieces, and then realize your opponent is playing by a completely different set of unwritten conventions. The arguments erupt frequently, fueled by too much wine and too little understanding. No, no, you can't move there. That's not how it works. Yes, it is. Everyone knows you can capture on a double six. You sigh in frustration, watching as the simple act of playing a game descends into a petty squabble over arbitrary interpretations. The Romans, for all their love of order in other aspects of life, seemed to have a surprisingly laissez-faire attitude when it came to their parlor games. A specific instance, though not directly related to a terrible invention, is the widespread use of dice made from various materials, often poorly balanced, leading to wildly unfair and unpredictable rolls, adding another layer of frustration to these already chaotic games. You toss your poorly carved bone dice back onto the table, feeling the weight of ancient boredom settle over you. Let's shift gears to something a little more personal: Roman hygiene. You've heard about the public baths, right? Luxurious, communal, a place for bathing and socializing. But even in the pursuit of cleanliness, the Romans managed to stumble upon some truly questionable practices and inventions. Take, for example, the Roman strigil. You're picturing a nice, relaxing soap and scrub, right? Think again. The strigil was a curved metal scraper. After oiling your body, you'd use this thing to scrape off the oil, sweat, and dirt. You can feel the cold metal against your skin, dragging across your arm, scraping away grime. It was effective. Certainly, in its own brutal way. But it wasn't exactly pleasant. You imagine the sensation, not of a gentle exfoliation, but more akin to having your skin flayed by a blunt blade. And then there's the communal aspect of it. In the public baths, you'd see people using their strigils, scraping away, and then, well, there was no real system for disposing of the scraped-off gunk. It just was. A common historical fact is that while the baths were impressive, the cleanliness standards, by modern terms, were often questionable, with water not always being changed frequently and the scraping method being far from hygienic. Imagine the communal strigil, shared by strangers, scraping away all manner of bodily fluids and dead skin cells. The very thought makes your stomach churn. This was a far cry from a refreshing shower. It was a utilitarian, somewhat gross, and entirely unglamorous process that highlights the stark differences in how ancient civilizations viewed personal hygiene compared to our modern sensibilities. You shudder, thinking about the invisible microbes swarming on every surface. the faint, cloying scent of unidentifiable bodily secretions hanging in the warm, humid air of the bathhouse. The academic debate continues to explore the true extent of disease transmission in these communal bathing environments. But for you, the sheer thought of it is enough to make you want to reach for a bottle of hand sanitizer. Finally, consider the Roman approach to timekeeping. You'd think a civilization so obsessed with order and precision would have a foolproof way of tracking the hours. You're picturing elegant sundials, perhaps even early water clocks. And they did have those. But the problem lay in their inherent inaccuracies and inconsistencies, which, while not inventions that didn't work, certainly caused plenty of frustration. Imagine trying to coordinate a meeting or catch a specific event when everyone's hour is different. Roman hours varied in length depending on the season, with daylight hours divided into 12, meaning a summer hour was much longer than a winter hour. You try to arrange to meet a friend at the 6th hour, only to find them arriving an hour later because their sundial, slightly askew, read differently from yours, or because they mentally adjusted for the shorter winter day while you didn't. You tap your foot impatiently, squinting at the shadows to gauge the time, feeling the slow creep of frustration as the sun moves across the sky at its own pace. The invention here isn't a physical object, but the system itself. A fluid, inconsistent method of timekeeping that must have driven punctual Romans to distraction. It's a subtle but significant example of how a seemingly simple concept, when applied with ancient limitations, could lead to daily irritations and miscommunications. A little-known detail is that even Roman water clocks, while more consistent than sundials, were notoriously difficult to calibrate accurately and required constant monitoring and refilling, making them more of a high-maintenance scientific curiosity than a truly practical, widespread timekeeping device. You throw your hands up in exasperation, realizing that being on time in ancient Rome was less about precision and more about a vague understanding of the sun's general position. You can only imagine the sheer chaos this must have caused for large-scale logistical operations, where precise timing was paramount. You're still in ancient Rome, breathing in that unique blend of dust, sweat, and something indefinable, realizing that even in a highly advanced society, not every brilliant idea translated into practical success. We've seen the grand military blunders and the everyday frustrations, but let's delve deeper into the Roman pursuit of innovation, particularly in areas where their ambition outstripped their technological capabilities or, frankly, their common sense. Imagine you're walking through a Roman marketplace, a bustling cacophony of vendors hawking their wares, citizens haggling over prices, and the ever-present drone of daily life. You pass by a stall selling various curious objects, and your eye catches something truly peculiar, an ancient Roman odometer. You might think, ingenious, a way to measure distances for road building or travel planning. And in theory, yes, this device, attributed to Vitruvius or even Hero of Alexandria, was essentially a cart with a series of gears that would drop a pebble into a box after a certain distance, usually a Roman mile. You picture it now, a small, unassuming cart, perhaps being pulled by a mule or even pushed by a slave. Attached to its wheel is a simple mechanism. As the wheel turns, a pin on the axle engages a 400-toothed gear. This gear, in turn, meshes with another gear, and so on, creating a chain of decreasing rotations. Finally, a small horizontal wheel with perforations lines up with a channel, dropping a pebble into a collection box. The idea is that each pebble represents a mile. Sounds perfectly logical, doesn't it? Except for the reality of Roman roads. Remember those rutted, uneven paths we talked about? The ones that turned into muddy bogs or dusty pits. You feel the jolt as the cartwheel hits a particularly deep rut, sending a tremor through the entire contraption. The delicate gears inside clatter, perhaps skipping a tooth or two, or maybe the pebble, instead of dropping neatly into its slot, gets stuck in the mechanism, or bounces out onto the road because of a sudden bump. A common historical fact is that while the Roman odometer was a fascinating concept, Its accuracy was highly debatable due to the inconsistent terrain and the rudimentary nature of its internal mechanics. You imagine trying to survey a new road with this device, painstakingly counting pebbles, only to realize your measurements are wildly off because the cart spent half its time bouncing through ditches or getting stuck in soft soil. It was an invention that fundamentally misunderstood the environment it was meant to operate in. The very concept of precise measurement was undermined by the unpredictable reality of ancient infrastructure. You sigh, looking at the handful of pebbles in the box, knowing they tell a story of effort, but not necessarily accuracy. The academic debate continues to question the true practical utility of the Roman odometer for large-scale surveying projects, suggesting it may have been more of a theoretical marvel than a dependable tool. Let's move on to the realm of comfort, or rather, the Roman attempts at it. You're in a Roman villa, perhaps belonging to a wealthy merchant, and you notice the elaborate heating system, the hypocaust. You're impressed, thinking, underfloor heating. How sophisticated. And indeed it was. Hot air from a furnace circulated under the floors and through the walls, warming the rooms above. This was a truly remarkable innovation, a testament to Roman engineering ingenuity. However, even brilliant inventions can have their flaws, especially when poorly executed or maintained. Imagine you're trying to relax in a hypocaust-heated room. You notice an odd, musty smell, perhaps a faint draft. The warmth isn't as even as you'd like. One corner of the room is positively toasty, while another remains stubbornly chilly. A little-known detail about hypocausts is that while efficient, they required constant maintenance. The channels for the hot air would often get clogged with soot, leading to inefficient heating and, sometimes, even dangerous accumulations of carbon monoxide if ventilation was poor. You feel a tickle in your throat, a slight headache beginning to form, and you wonder if the warmth is worth the potential health risks. You picture slaves constantly shoveling fuel into the furnace, cleaning out the narrow flues, battling the perpetual buildup of grime. If the system wasn't meticulously maintained, it could become a source of frustration, health hazards, and immense inefficiency. The dream of cozy warmth could quickly turn into a smoky, unevenly heated nightmare. So, while the hypocaust itself was a marvel, its practical application was often fraught with challenges, making it an invention that worked, but often with significant caveats and a lot of manual labor. You shift uncomfortably, feeling the uneven heat and thinking that perhaps a good old-fashioned brazier would have been less trouble. Now, let's explore some of the more eccentric Roman ideas. The Romans, for all their pragmatism, sometimes indulged in grand theatrical projects that were more about spectacle than true utility. Consider the naumachia, mock naval battles staged in purpose-built basins or even flooded amphitheaters. You hear the roar of the crowd, smell the damp earth, and imagine ships clashing, oars splintering, and men falling into the water, all for entertainment. On the surface, it sounds incredibly exciting. A true feat of engineering to flood such massive spaces. But here's the rub. The practicalities were nightmarish. Flooding an arena like the Colosseum required an immense amount of water. And more importantly, a way to drain it quickly and efficiently. You see the elaborate system of pipes and sluice gates designed to fill and empty the arena. But the process was agonizingly slow. Filling the arena could take days, and draining it even longer, often leaving behind a muddy, stagnant mess. A common historical fact is that, while impressive, naumachii were incredibly resource-intensive and often left the venues unusable for other events for extended periods. You imagine the impatience of the crowds, waiting for the water to slowly rise or recede, the air thick with anticipation, slowly replaced by the stench of stagnant water and mud. Furthermore, the naval battles themselves were often far from realistic. The ships, though real, were often smaller versions, and the battles were largely staged. Lacking the true ferocity and unpredictability of real naval warfare, it was a spectacle, yes, but a costly, slow, and often underwhelming one when judged against its immense logistical demands. The academic debate still rages about the true scale and frequency of naumachia, with some historians arguing they were rarer and less grand than often depicted, precisely because of the immense difficulties involved in staging them. You stifle a yawn, realizing that for all the effort, this grand display of naval power is more akin to a poorly choreographed play than a genuine battle. Let's turn to another area where Roman ambition sometimes outstripped practicality: their agricultural methods. While they made significant advancements in irrigation and crop rotation, they also clung to some rather inefficient tools and techniques. Take the Roman plow. You picture a sturdy wooden implement, pulled by oxen, efficiently turning the soil, and for the most part, it was a workhorse of Roman agriculture. However, many Roman plows were simple ard plows, designed merely to scratch the surface of the soil rather than turn it over. You feel the heavy handles in your hands, the resistance of the earth as the ard struggles through tough soil. It's effective in light, easily cultivated land, but utterly frustrating in heavier, wetter clays. You see the farmer struggling, the oxen straining, making multiple passes over the same field just to achieve a superficial breaking of the soil. This meant more labor, less effective weed control, and ultimately, lower yields in many areas. A little-known detail is that while moldboard plows which turned the soil over existed in other parts of the world, they were not widely adopted in Rome until much later. Contributing to the less intensive nature of much Roman agriculture, you wipe sweat from your brow, your muscles aching, realizing that despite all your efforts, the soil still looks largely undisturbed. This resistance to adopting more efficient plowing technology meant that Roman agriculture, while productive, was often more labor-intensive than it needed to be, and not as efficient as it could have been. It's a classic example of cultural inertia, where existing methods, even if suboptimal, persist for centuries. The frustration of Roman farmers, toiling in fields that yielded less than their potential, must have been immense. You can almost hear their grumbles as they pushed their simple ards through stubborn earth, knowing there had to be a better way, but lacking the widespread adoption of it. The constant battle against weeds and the need for repeated plowing added layers of exhaustion to an already arduous life. Consider also the Roman approach to pest control in agriculture. You're familiar with modern pesticides and sophisticated methods. The Romans, naturally, had a different approach. One particularly bizarre method involved burying a female frog in a pot in the middle of a field to ward off hail. Or using certain animal dung. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from earlier? No good. Just another weird Roman concoction as a magical repellent. You're watching a farmer carefully place a terrified frog into a small clay pot, then bury it with great solemnity, genuinely believing this act will protect his crops from a violent hailstorm. You blink, trying to reconcile the scientific understanding you possess with this ancient, superstitious practice. While not an invention in the mechanical sense, these superstitious agricultural technologies represent a collective failure of rational thought in the face of natural phenomena. They highlight the blend of empirical observation and outright superstition that characterized much of Roman life. You shake your head, thinking of all the wasted effort, the lost crops, and the sheer futility of these rituals. A common historical fact is that despite their advancements, Roman agricultural practices were often heavily influenced by superstition and tradition, rather than purely scientific reasoning. The academic debate still explores the extent to which these beliefs truly impacted agricultural output. But for you, witnessing such practices is simply mind-boggling. You wonder how many frogs were sacrificed in the futile hope of a bountiful harvest. You find yourself observing the daily lives of the Romans, moving from grand architectural follies to the more intimate, yet equally frustrating, aspects of their personal care and domestic habits. We often marvel at the Roman baths and their intricate plumbing, but sometimes, even in the realm of hygiene, they stumbled upon concepts that were less than ideal. Imagine you're in a Roman public latrine. You're picturing individual stalls, privacy, perhaps even some running water. Forget it. What you see is a long bench with holes cut into it, side by side, with no partitions whatsoever. You sit down, shoulder to shoulder with complete strangers, engaging in your most private bodily functions while chatting about the day's events. You can almost feel the lack of personal space, the sheer awkwardness of the situation, as you try to avert your gaze from your neighbor. And then there's the communal sponge on a stick, or tersorium, used for cleaning yourself after doing your business. You see it, a shared sponge attached to a wooden stick, dipped into a channel of constantly running water in front of the seats. While the water was flowing, it was still a communal sponge. You try to suppress a shiver, imagining the countless hands and other body parts that have used it before you. A common historical fact is that despite the running water, these shared sponges were a significant vector for disease transmission in Roman society. You feel a sudden wave of nausea, wondering if the mild stomach upset you've been feeling is a direct result of this less than sanitary practice. This wasn't an invention that didn't work, per se, but an invention that worked too well at spreading germs. The Romans, for all their engineering prowess, clearly lacked a comprehensive understanding of microbiology. A little-known detail is that while some wealthier Romans might have had their own private tersorium or used cloths, the communal sponge was the norm in public facilities, underscoring the stark differences in hygiene standards between social classes and modern times. You grimace, thinking that perhaps holding it in would have been a better option. The academic debate still explores the exact impact of these practices on Roman public health. But for you, the sheer thought of it is enough to make you profoundly grateful for modern plumbing. Let's delve into the fascinating, and often horrifying, world of Roman medicine. You might envision wise physicians, herbal remedies, and perhaps even some early surgical tools. And while Roman doctors did possess a certain level of skill, some of their common cures were, to put it mildly, terrifyingly ineffective or outright dangerous. Take, for instance, the widespread use of gladiator blood as a cure for epilepsy. You're watching a desperate family, distraught over their loved one's seizures. Bring a small flask of fresh gladiator blood to their ailing relative. The belief was that the strength and vitality of the fallen gladiator would somehow transfer to the patient, driving out the evil spirits causing the illness. You feel a chill run down your spine as you witness this macabre ritual. The smell of freshly spilled blood hangs faintly in the air. While it's not a mechanical invention, this was a commonly accepted medical technology or practice that highlights the Roman world's blend of empirical observation and profound superstition. It's an invention of belief that spectacularly failed in its intended purpose. A common historical fact is that Roman medical practices often incorporated elements of magic, superstition, and empirical observation, leading to a strange mix of effective and utterly bizarre treatments. You wince, imagining the psychological trauma, not to mention the actual physical harm this kind of treatment could inflict. The little-known detail here is that this practice wasn't just limited to gladiator blood. Other forms of human blood, often from condemned criminals, were also used. The academic debate continues to explore the complex interplay of cultural beliefs and proto-scientific methods in Roman medicine. Now, let's explore the Roman approach to personal aesthetics, particularly hair removal. You're thinking, perhaps, of a simple razor or tweezers. But for the more thorough Roman, there was a particularly painful invention: resin depilatories, essentially ancient waxing. You see a Roman woman preparing for a bath, applying a sticky, warm substance to her legs. The scent of pine resin fills the air, sweet and pungent. You know what's coming next. She presses a cloth onto the resin, lets it cool, and then with a sharp tug, you almost wince in sympathy. The shouts, the cries, the tears, all for the sake of smooth skin. This wasn't a device that malfunctioned. It was designed to inflict pain for cosmetic purposes. It worked, but at a cost that makes modern waxing seem like a gentle massage. You imagine the fiery red welts, the stinging sensation, and the sheer fortitude required to endure such a process. A common historical fact is that hair removal was a widespread practice among wealthy Romans, with smooth skin being a mark of status. A little-known detail is that besides resin, other, even more caustic substances like arsenic sulfide were sometimes used, with predictably disastrous results, highlighting the extreme measures Romans would go to for beauty. You shudder at the thought, realizing that sometimes the invention is the method itself. And in this case, it was a truly terrible one for your comfort. The academic debate still discusses the exact recipes and methods used for these ancient depilatories, but the pain, you're certain, was universal. Let's consider Roman lighting. While they had impressive oil lamps and candles, they also experimented with more elaborate and often problematic systems. Imagine a grand Roman villa at night, illuminated by numerous oil lamps. You expect a warm, consistent glow, but what you often got was something less than ideal. The invention here isn't the lamp itself, but the poor quality of the oil and wicks often used. You see the lamps flickering erratically, casting dancing shadows on the walls, making it difficult to read or even navigate a room. The air is thick with the acrid smell of burning oil, stinging your nostrils and making your eyes water. A common historical fact is that while olives were abundant, the quality of lamp oil varied wildly, and poor wicks would quickly char, leading to smoky, dim, and unpleasant light. You realize that a truly consistent, bright source of illumination was a luxury, or often just impossible. For most Romans, this wasn't a lamp that didn't work. It was a lamp that worked poorly and with significant side effects. You try to read a scroll, but the flickering light and the smoky fumes make your head ache. It's a frustrating reminder of the limitations of ancient technology, even for something as fundamental as light. The academic debate continues to explore the economic impact of lamp oil production and consumption on Roman society, highlighting the challenges of maintaining even basic domestic amenities. Finally, let's talk about Roman roads again, but from a different angle. Specifically, the Roman milestone. You might think, how could a milestone be a terrible invention? It's a simple, effective way to mark distances. And indeed, many were. But imagine you are a traveler, a merchant perhaps, navigating a less traveled Roman road. You're relying on these milestones to tell you how far you've come and how much further you have to go. The problem arises when you encounter a milestone that has been moved, re-erected in the wrong place after repairs, or simply defaced over time. You stop, scratching your head, looking at the inscription that clearly states XX miles to Rome, when you know you've only traveled 5, or worse, the inscription is so worn away by time and weather that it's completely illegible. You feel a surge of frustration, realizing that the very tool meant to guide you is now leading you astray, or offering no guidance at all. A little-known detail is that while central authorities meticulously placed milestones on major roads, local upkeep on secondary routes was often inconsistent, leading to misaligned or unreadable markers. This wasn't a design flaw, but a maintenance flaw that rendered the invention useless or actively misleading. You pull out a small map if you even have one, trying to reconcile the confusing information, feeling lost on a road that should have been clearly marked. The academic debate continues to evaluate the effectiveness of the Roman road network as a whole, acknowledging that while the main arteries were impressive, the less maintained local roads posed significant challenges for travelers. You sigh, looking at the faded inscription, knowing that sometimes, even the simplest of tools can become the most infuriating when neglected. You're still wandering through the labyrinthine streets of ancient Rome, marveling at the sheer ambition of its people, even when that ambition led them down some truly bizarre technological dead ends. We've seen how their grand designs could falter, and how even their personal habits had their own curious shortcomings. Now, let's consider some of the more abstract, yet equally impactful, inventions that perhaps didn't work as well as the Romans intended their systems of governance and record-keeping, which, while foundational, often contained frustrating flaws. Imagine you're a Roman citizen, perhaps a humble shopkeeper, trying to navigate the intricate web of Roman law. You're told that Rome is a city of laws, and indeed, they had an impressive legal system. But what about the Roman legal codes themselves, especially in their early forms? While sophisticated for their time, they were often highly complex, contradictory, and not always accessible to the common person. You're trying to understand a dispute over a property line or a minor contractual disagreement, and you find yourself lost in a maze of obscure Latin phrasing and conflicting precedents. You feel a wave of bewilderment wash over you as you try to decipher a legal text, written in a dense, formal style that even educated Romans often struggled with. A common historical fact is that early Roman law was often unwritten or based on tradition, making it difficult to apply consistently, leading to arbitrary decisions. The very invention of a codified legal system, while a step forward, was initially imperfect, leading to confusion and injustice for many. You imagine the sheer frustration of trying to get a fair hearing when the very rules of the game are a mystery to you. A little-known detail is that much of early Roman law was closely guarded by the priestly class, making it even less transparent to the general populace. The academic debate still rages about the true accessibility of Roman law to the average citizen throughout different periods of the Republic and Empire. But for you, trying to make sense of it all is like trying to untangle a ball of yarn after a particularly mischievous kitten has had its way with it. Let's move into the realm of communication, specifically the Roman postal system, the cursus publicus. You might envision a highly efficient network, delivering messages quickly across the vast empire, and for official dispatches, carried by relays of riders and wagons. It was indeed remarkably effective. But what about for you, the private citizen? Wanting to send a letter to a friend or relative in a distant province, you approach the local post office, perhaps a small, unassuming building, hoping to send your message. You quickly discover that the cursus publicus was primarily for government use. Private citizens could only use it if they had special permission or if they bribed an official. You feel a pang of disappointment, realizing that your heartfelt letter to your estranged cousin might never reach them. This wasn't an invention that didn't work, but one that was largely inaccessible to the majority of the population, thereby failing in its broader potential to connect the empire's citizens. You imagine the immense frustration of being unable to communicate freely across vast distances, relying instead on slow, unreliable private messengers or the kindness of passing travelers. A common historical fact is that while the cursus publicus facilitated imperial administration, it did not serve the general public in the way a modern postal service does. You sigh, your letter still clutched in your hand, realizing that for all Rome's advanced infrastructure, personal communication remained largely a hit-or-miss affair. The academic debate still explores the extent to which informal networks and private couriers filled this gap. But for you, the lack of a universal postal service is a palpable inconvenience. Now, consider Roman coinage and currency. You're holding a Roman coin in your hand, perhaps a denarius, marveling at the emperor's profile. You expect a stable, reliable form of currency that facilitates trade and economic activity, and for a long time, Roman coinage was precisely that. However, over time, a subtle yet destructive invention emerged: coin debasement. You're a merchant, receiving payment for your goods. You bite down on the coin, testing its hardness, feeling the weight in your palm. But over the centuries, successive emperors, facing financial crises, began to reduce the precious metal content of their coins, replacing silver or gold with cheaper base metals like copper. You receive a batch of coins that look genuine enough, but feel suspiciously light, or have a strange, dull ring to them. You realize you've just been paid with debased currency, meaning the purchasing power of your money has subtly, insidiously, diminished. This invention wasn't a physical object, Bim, but a systemic economic policy that fundamentally undermined trust in the currency and led to rampant inflation. You feel the erosion of your wealth, the slow but steady increase in prices as everyone realizes the money is worth less. A common historical fact is that rampant debasement of coinage was a major contributing factor to the economic instability and crises of the later Roman Empire. You shake your head, watching your profits dwindle, knowing that the very foundation of your financial security is being systematically weakened by imperial policy. A little-known detail is that people would often try to clip the edges of pure coins, shaving off tiny bits of precious metal, exacerbating the problem and leading to ever more drastic measures by the authorities. The academic debate continues to explore the exact mechanisms and long-term consequences of Roman debasement. But for you, it's a clear and present danger to your livelihood. Let's explore a more niche, yet equally frustrating, invention: the Roman approach to agricultural weights and measures. You might think that for a society built on trade and administration, standardization would be paramount. And while they had official standards, their application could be maddeningly inconsistent across different regions and even different markets. You are a farmer, bringing your produce to sell in the city. You measure out your grain using your local measures, confident in the quantity. But when you arrive at the city market, the buyer insists on using their measures, which seem to be slightly different from yours. You argue, trying to reconcile the discrepancy, but the scales and containers seem to shift in size depending on who is doing the measuring. You feel a growing sense of injustice, realizing that you might be getting shortchanged simply because of regional variations in what constitutes a bushel or a pound. This isn't a faulty tool, but a faulty system of inconsistent application. It's an invention of measurement that worked poorly due to a lack of universal enforcement. You see others arguing, haggling, and occasionally coming to blows over these same discrepancies. A common historical fact is that while Rome had standardized weights and measures, local customs and practices often persisted, leading to significant friction in trade. You sigh, knowing that even with the best intentions, you're often at the mercy of localized, inconsistent measurement systems. The academic debate still discusses the economic impact of these regional variations on trade and taxation, highlighting the constant challenges faced by merchants and producers alike. Finally, consider the Roman census system. You imagine a meticulously organized process, accurately counting the population and their assets for taxation and military conscription. And for a time, it was indeed impressive, allowing the Romans to understand and manage their vast empire. But what about the inherent flaws and limitations that often made it an invention that, while grand in scope, was often imperfect in execution? You are a Roman citizen, filling out your census forms. You understand the need for it, but you also see the loopholes. Wealthy citizens might underreport their assets to avoid higher taxes. Those looking to avoid military service might try to conceal family members. And for the vast, sprawling empire, simply reaching every individual, especially in remote areas or newly conquered territories, was a monumental, often impossible, task. You hear whispers of ghost populations, of entire villages that mysteriously disappeared from the rolls, or of families claiming fewer children than they actually had. This wasn't a malicious invention, but an administrative invention that, despite its best efforts, was inherently prone to inaccuracies and manipulation. It worked, but often with significant margins of error that would drive a modern statistician to despair. You feel the weight of bureaucracy, the demand for precision that is impossible to achieve in a world without modern data collection methods. A common historical fact is that while Roman censuses were groundbreaking, they were never perfectly accurate, with estimates often varying wildly due to practical limitations and deliberate evasion. You wonder how much the true population of Rome differed from the official figures, and how much wealth went untaxed because of these imperfections. The academic debate continues to analyze the methodology and reliability of Roman census data, highlighting the constant struggle between imperial ambition and practical reality. You're now delving deeper into the fabric of Roman society, moving beyond the obvious blunders to the more subtle yet pervasive frustrations that permeated daily life, often stemming from inventions or systems that, while perhaps well-intentioned, just didn't quite hit the mark. We've explored grand engineering projects and personal hygiene woes. Now let's turn our attention to Roman public services, specifically those designed to maintain peace and order, or provide for the general welfare. Imagine you're a Roman citizen, perhaps a humble plebeian, experiencing a minor theft or disturbance in your neighborhood. You expect, naturally, a swift and efficient response from the city's peacekeepers. You might picture a highly organized police force, patrolling the streets, ready to intervene. What you get, however, is the Vigiles Urbani, Rome's early police and fire brigade. While undeniably brave and essential for fire suppression, their role in maintaining public order was less than stellar. You see a group of vigiles, perhaps a handful of men, lumbering through the crowded streets. Armed with rudimentary equipment, their primary focus was fire, and crime prevention was often a secondary, reactive duty. You witness a street brawl breaking out, loud and violent, and the vigils, if they even arrive, do so slowly, perhaps after the incident is already over or has escalated significantly. You feel a sense of vulnerability, realizing that while there's a force protecting the city, their ability to prevent or swiftly respond to everyday crime is severely limited. This wasn't an invention that didn't work, but a public service that was understaffed, under-equipped, and under-focused on its secondary role, making it an often ineffective deterrent to petty crime. You sigh in exasperation, realizing you're mostly on your own if a minor infraction occurs. A common historical fact is that serious crime was often dealt with by the military or higher authorities, while the vigils primarily focused on fires, highlighting the gap in everyday policing. The academic debate continues to explore the true extent of law and order in Roman cities. But for you, the lack of immediate protection is a palpable concern. Let's shift to the Roman water supply system. You're thinking of those magnificent aqueducts, channeling fresh water from distant springs into the city. A true marvel of engineering, providing abundant water for baths, fountains, and private homes. But even this grand system had its frustrating quirks, especially for the average citizen. The invention here isn't the aqueduct itself, but the system of water distribution within the city. You approach a public fountain, eager to fill your amphora. You notice that while water flows freely, it's often wasted, overflowing endlessly. And for private homes, acquiring a direct connection to the aqueduct was a complex, often corrupt, process. You see wealthy individuals with multiple private pipes, while your own family might have to rely on public fountains, often at a considerable distance, or pay exorbitant fees for a small, unreliable trickle. You feel a pang of injustice, knowing that a resource so abundant is distributed so unevenly, often through favoritism or bribery. A common historical fact is that much of the Roman water supply was used for public baths and ornamental fountains, with private connections often being a privilege for the wealthy. This inefficiency in distribution meant that while the invention of the aqueduct worked marvelously in bringing water to Rome, the subsequent invention of its internal distribution system was often inequitable and wasteful. You lug your heavy amphora back home, feeling the strain, and wondering why such a brilliant system couldn't be managed more fairly. The academic debate still discusses the ecological and social impact of Rome's water consumption, highlighting the balance between impressive engineering and practical resource management. Now, let's explore Roman domestic architecture, specifically the attempts at heating and cooling methods beyond the hypocaust. You might envision elaborate systems for climate control, and while the hypocaust was advanced, not every home had one, and other methods were far less effective. Consider the use of braziers for heating. You're in a Roman insula, a multi-story apartment building, in the depths of winter. You light a brazier, a simple open pan of burning charcoal, hoping for warmth. You feel the pleasant warmth emanating from the brazier. But quickly, a faint, acrid smell begins to fill the air. Your eyes start to water. You realize the immediate danger: carbon monoxide poisoning. This wasn't an invention that didn't work for heating, but one that was inherently dangerous and poorly ventilated, making it a health hazard. You cough, feeling a tightness in your chest, and know that you must open a window, letting in the biting cold, just to avoid asphyxiation. A common historical fact is that many Romans died from carbon monoxide poisoning due to poorly ventilated braziers, especially in smaller, say, enclosed spaces. You shiver, weighing the desire for warmth against the very real threat to your life. The little-known detail is that Roman texts rarely mention specific ventilation systems for braziers, indicating a widespread lack of understanding of the dangers. The academic debate continues to estimate the number of deaths attributable to these practices, painting a grim picture of daily life for many Romans. Let's turn to Roman entertainment again, but focus on the more mundane aspects, particularly the Roman theater and its acoustics. You're watching a play in a grand Roman amphitheater, eager to hear the actors' voices. You expect clear, crisp dialogue, perhaps even amplified by clever architectural design. What you often get, however, is a frustrating battle against echo, distortion, and the sheer scale of the venue. You strain to hear the words, trying to make out the dialogue over the murmur of the crowd and the occasional distant shouts. The vast open-air space, while visually impressive, was often acoustically challenging. Sound would bounce off the hard stone surfaces, creating confusing echoes, or simply dissipate into the air before reaching your ears. This wasn't an invention that didn't work, but a venue that, despite its grandeur, often failed in its primary function of clear vocal projection. You lean forward, cupping your ear, feeling the frustration of missing key lines and plot points. A common historical fact is that actors often had to use masks with exaggerated mouthpieces, not just for character, but also to help project their voices in these vast spaces. You sigh, resigning yourself to understanding only half of the performance. A beautiful spectacle with muffled dialogue. The academic debate still explores the use of vessel resonators in some Greek and Roman theaters, designed to improve acoustics, but their effectiveness and widespread adoption remain contested, highlighting the ongoing struggle with sound engineering in ancient times. Finally, let's consider Roman concrete, specifically its long-term durability in certain applications. You're thinking, of course, of the Pantheon, and Roman concrete is legendary for its strength and longevity, famously outlasting many modern materials. And indeed, for structures like harbors and certain buildings, it was incredibly effective. But what about its use in less ideal conditions, or when mixed improperly? You're observing a section of a Roman wall, perhaps an older structure not built with the highest quality materials or by the most skilled engineers. You notice cracks appearing, small chunks flaking off, and perhaps even some erosion. While Roman concrete itself was a revolutionary invention, its performance varied wildly depending on the quality of its components and the skill of the builders. You run your hand over the rough, crumbling surface, realizing that not all Roman concrete was created equal. A common historical fact is that while their marine concrete was exceptionally durable, early forms or concrete used in less prestigious buildings often suffered from cracking and deterioration due to aggregate quality, mixing ratios, and moisture. This invention worked, but its reliability was inconsistent, leading to premature decay in many instances. You wonder how many smaller, less celebrated Roman structures have simply crumbled into dust, their concrete failing to live up to the legendary reputation. The academic debate continues to uncover the specific recipes and aggregate sources that contributed to both the successes and failures of Roman concrete, showcasing the nuances of their material science. You're moving through the daily grind of Roman life, noticing how even the most mundane aspects could become sources of peculiar inconvenience and outright failure. We've explored the grand failures of public services and the inconsistencies of their acclaimed materials. Now, let's turn our attention to Roman industry and manufacturing, where ingenious ideas sometimes met with significant practical limitations, or simply produced things that were, by modern standards, terrible. Imagine you're in a Roman pottery workshop, the air thick with the smell of clay and wood smoke. You're watching artisans meticulously shaping clay, preparing it for the kiln. You're thinking of elegant amphorae and beautiful dinnerware. And indeed, Roman pottery was often quite beautiful and functional. But what about the less glamorous, yet equally essential, aspect of pottery, the kilns themselves and the resulting inconsistent firing quality? You see the kiln, a large dome-shaped structure, smoke billowing from its vents. The process of firing pottery was incredibly labor-intensive and notoriously difficult to control. You feel the intense heat radiating from the kiln, knowing that inside, temperatures are fluctuating wildly. You watch as a batch of pots is pulled out, and immediately you notice the imperfections. Some are underfired, crumbly and weak. Others are overfired, warped or vitrified into useless lumps. This wasn't an invention that didn't work, but a core manufacturing process that was highly inconsistent and susceptible to human error and environmental factors, leading to a significant amount of wasted product. You sigh, seeing the pile of rejects growing, realizing the sheer inefficiency of it all. A common historical fact is that Roman potters often faced high rates of breakage and spoilage during firing due to inadequate temperature control and the lack of sophisticated pyrometry. You hear the exasperated shouts of the master potter, inspecting the ruined pieces, his profits literally going up in smoke. The academic debate still explores the various kiln designs used across the Roman Empire and their impact on efficiency and product quality, highlighting the constant struggle to perfect a fundamental industry. Let's turn to Roman textile production, specifically their approach to dyeing fabrics. You're picturing vibrant colors, rich hues, and long-lasting dyes. And while they produced some impressive purple and red dyes, many common dyes were quite unstable and difficult to apply consistently. You're in a textile workshop, the air pungent with various chemical smells. You see a vat of dye bubbling away, and workers carefully dipping lengths of wool or linen. You notice that despite their efforts, the color is often patchy, uneven, or simply not as vibrant as intended. More frustratingly, you learn that many of these dyes were prone to fading quickly when exposed to sunlight or washing. You imagine buying a beautifully colored tunic, only to see its vibrancy diminish after just a few wears and washes, leaving you with a dull, faded garment. This wasn't an invention that didn't work, but a chemical process that was inherently limited by the available natural pigments in ancient chemistry, leading to inconsistent results and short-lived brilliance. You shake your head, thinking of the effort expended for such fleeting beauty. A common historical fact is that many common Roman dyes, particularly blues and greens derived from plant sources, were notoriously fugitive. A little-known detail is that Roman fullers, who processed wool and cloth, often used urine as a mordant to help dyes adhere, adding another layer of unpleasantness to the process. The academic debate continues to analyze the specific chemical compositions of ancient Roman dyes and their resistance to light and washing, revealing the challenges of color permanence in the ancient world. Now, consider Roman efforts at public signage and advertising. You might think of clear, well-placed signs guiding you through the forum or announcing public events. And while they had some impressive examples of monumental inscriptions, their everyday street signage was often less than effective, or even confusing. The invention here isn't the sign itself, but the lack of standardized and easily legible public information displays. You're walking through a crowded street, trying to find a particular shop or a public building. You glance at various painted signs on walls or small carved tablets. You notice that the lettering styles vary wildly. The abbreviations are often obscure, and the placement of signs can be haphazard, obscured by other buildings or crowded street vendors. You feel a growing sense of frustration as you wander aimlessly, unable to decipher the cryptic messages or even spot the relevant information. This wasn't an invention that didn't work, but a system of public communication that was unstandardized and often poorly executed, failing to provide clear guidance to the public. You scratch your head, trying to make sense of a faded, poorly painted sign advertising a fishmonger that somehow looks exactly like the sign for a cobbler. A common historical fact is that while Pompeii provides excellent examples of street art and commercial signs, the overall system lacked the consistent legibility and placement found in modern public signage. The academic debate continues to explore the semiotics of Roman public art and its effectiveness in conveying information to a largely illiterate populace, highlighting the challenges of mass communication in the ancient world. Let's delve into Roman personal transportation, specifically their use of litters and their inherent limitations. You might picture elegant sedan chairs, carried by strong slaves, offering a comfortable and efficient way to navigate the crowded city streets, particularly for the wealthy or infirm. And for short distances, in ideal conditions, they were indeed quite effective. But imagine you're a Roman patrician, being carried through the narrow, bustling streets of Rome in your litter. You feel the constant jostling as your bearers navigate through throngs of people, dodging street vendors and stray animals. The sheer effort required to move this heavy contraption, and the constant need for your bearers to shout warnings and clear a path, makes for a far less serene experience than you might imagine. This wasn't an invention that didn't work, but a mode of transport that was highly dependent on human labor and the chaotic urban environment, making it slow, uncomfortable, and often impractical in truly crowded areas. You feel the strain in your back from the constant swaying, and the exasperation of being stuck in a human traffic jam, moving at a snail's pace. A common historical fact is that, despite their luxury, litters were often slow and prone to getting stuck in Rome's perpetually congested streets. A little-known detail is that laws sometimes restricted the use of litters in certain areas or at certain times to ease congestion, indicating their contribution to urban traffic woes. The academic debate still discusses the social implications of litter use and its impact on urban mobility in ancient Rome, highlighting the surprising limitations of a seemingly luxurious form of transport. Finally, consider Roman efforts at public sanitation beyond the grand sewers. You might think of a system that effectively managed waste for the entire population. And while the Cloaca Maxima was an engineering marvel, it primarily served the central parts of the city and public buildings. For most Roman citizens, particularly those in the densely packed insula, waste disposal was a constant and often disgusting problem. You're walking down a narrow alleyway in a residential district, and the air is thick with a truly nauseating smell. You notice discarded food scraps, general refuse, and even human waste simply being tossed out of windows onto the streets below, or collected in makeshift pits. The invention here isn't a single object, but the lack of a comprehensive and widespread residential waste collection and disposal system. This meant that despite their advanced sewers, large parts of Rome were perpetually unsanitary. You gingerly step around a pile of refuse, trying to avoid stepping in something truly unpleasant, feeling the oppressive weight of the city's unsanitary conditions. A common historical fact is that despite their advanced public latrines and sewers, waste management for private dwellings was often rudimentary and contributed significantly to urban pollution and disease. You cough, trying to clear the stench from your nostrils, realizing that for many, life in Rome was a constant battle against filth and disease. The academic debate continues to estimate the mortality rates associated with these unsanitary conditions, painting a stark picture of life for the common Roman. You're observing Roman society from a new vantage point, looking at how their intellectual pursuits and attempts at systematic knowledge often ran into surprising roadblocks, leading to inventions of thought or methodology that were, by modern standards, incomplete or even flawed. We've explored the practical shortcomings of their industries and public services. Now, let's consider their scientific and academic endeavors. Imagine you're in a Roman library, surrounded by scrolls of papyrus and parchment. You're thinking of a vast, organized repository of knowledge, easily accessible and consistently accurate. And indeed, Roman libraries, like the one in Alexandria, though largely Greek-influenced, were impressive. However, the invention here isn't the library itself, but the Roman approach to knowledge preservation and dissemination, which often resulted in frustrating inconsistencies and losses. You pick up a scroll, hoping to find a specific text on natural philosophy. You quickly discover that while many texts were copied, the process was manual and prone to error. You find scribal mistakes, missing passages, and variations between different copies of the same work. Furthermore, The focus on preserving Greek works often meant that original Roman scientific or philosophical treatises were less systematically copied or preserved, leading to their eventual loss. You feel a pang of frustration, knowing that vital information might be incomplete or simply vanished due to the haphazard nature of ancient copying and archiving. This wasn't an invention that didn't work, but a system of knowledge management that was inefficient, error-prone, and culturally biased, leading to a significant loss of intellectual heritage. You sigh, placing the flawed scroll back on its shelf, realizing that relying on such a system for accurate knowledge was a constant challenge. A common historical fact is that much of our understanding of Roman science and philosophy comes through later Byzantine or Arabic translations because original Latin works were not always systematically preserved. The academic debate still explores the extent to which original Roman scientific thought was truly innovative versus largely derivative of Greek ideas, with some arguing that the focus on practical application often overshadowed theoretical advancements. Let's turn to Roman military engineering, specifically their attempts at pontoon bridges for rapid river crossings. You're picturing an efficient, quickly deployable structure, allowing legions to cross formidable waterways. And for certain campaigns, they did construct impressive bridges, notably Caesar's Rhine Bridge. But the invention here isn't the bridge itself, but the inherent limitations and logistical nightmares involved in their rapid deployment for large-scale operations. You stand on the bank of a wide, fast-flowing river, watching Roman engineers struggling to assemble a pontoon bridge. You see the immense effort involved felling countless trees for timber, transporting heavy boats, battling strong currents, and securing the entire structure against the force of the water. You feel the constant tension, the fear that a strong gust of wind or a sudden rise in water level could sweep away all their hard work. This wasn't an invention that didn't work, but one that was extraordinarily resource-intensive, time-consuming, and vulnerable to environmental conditions, making it a logistical headache that could bog down entire campaigns. You watch a section of the bridge collapse under the strain, sending men and timber tumbling into the churning water, realizing the incredible human and material cost involved. A common historical fact is that while Roman pontoon bridges were effective, they often required massive amounts of labor and materials, limiting their widespread and immediate deployment in all tactical situations. The little-known detail is that Caesar's famous Rhine Bridge was built and dismantled in a remarkably short time. But this was an exception, showcasing extreme engineering effort for strategic imperative rather than typical military construction. The academic debate still explores the tactical and strategic impact of Roman bridge-building capabilities, weighing their engineering brilliance against the immense logistical challenges they presented. Now, consider Roman road construction again, but specifically the invention of the Roman surveying tools and their inherent limitations. You might think of highly accurate instruments, ensuring perfectly straight roads and precise measurements. And for main imperial roads, they achieved remarkable accuracy. But what about the tools themselves and their susceptibility to error? You're watching Roman surveyors at work, using a groma, a simple device with weighted strings for establishing right angles, or a corybates, a long wooden beam with a channel for water to ensure a level surface. You notice the painstaking slowness of the process, the constant adjustments required to account for wind, uneven ground, and the sheer clumsiness of the instruments. You see a surveyor squinting against the sun, trying to align the strings of his groma, only for a slight breeze to make them sway erratically. This wasn't an invention that didn't work, but a set of tools that were laborious to use and highly susceptible to environmental interference and human error, making precision a challenge, especially on difficult terrain. You feel the frustration building as you witness the slow, meticulous process, knowing that a single misplaced mark could lead to a significant deviation over miles. A common historical fact is that despite the simplicity of their tools, Roman surveyors achieved incredible accuracy over long distances. But this was a testament to their patience and skill, not necessarily the inherent perfection of the instruments. The academic debate still discusses the various Roman surveying instruments and their comparative accuracies, emphasizing the extraordinary skill required to compensate for tool limitations. Let's delve into Roman domestic technologies once more, focusing on the invention of Roman cooking stoves and their inherent inefficiencies. You might picture a well-designed kitchen with a modern-looking range or oven. What you often find, however, are simple hearths or portable braziers, and a surprising lack of advanced cooking technology for the average household. You're in a Roman kitchen, perhaps a small, smoky room in an insula. You see food being cooked over an open fire or on a small charcoal brazier. The invention here isn't a single item, but the general lack of enclosed, controlled heating for cooking, leading to smoky kitchens, inefficient fuel consumption, and difficult temperature regulation. You cough as smoke fills the small space, stinging your eyes. You watch as a cook struggles to maintain a consistent temperature, constantly adding or removing charcoal, often resulting in burnt or undercooked food. This wasn't an invention that didn't work, but a cooking method that was inefficient, polluting, and labor-intensive, making daily meal preparation a much more arduous task than it needed to be. You sigh, imagining the constant battle against smoke and unpredictable heat. A common historical fact is that many Roman households relied on simple open hearths or portable braziers for cooking, leading to pervasive indoor air pollution. The academic debate still discusses the dietary habits and culinary techniques of ancient Romans, often highlighting the challenges of food preparation in homes without modern cooking appliances. Finally, consider the Roman invention of public clocks, specifically the clepsydra, or water clock. You're thinking of a reliable public timekeeper, allowing everyone to know the exact hour. And while clepsydrae were indeed used in public spaces and were more accurate than sundials on cloudy days or at night, they had their own significant shortcomings. You stand by a large public water clock, watching the water drip from one vessel to another, the rising water level indicating the passage of time. You notice, however, that the rate of flow can be inconsistent due to impurities in the water, temperature changes, or simply blockages. You also realize that someone has to constantly monitor and refill these clocks, making them high-maintenance inventions. You glance at the water level, then at the sun's position, and realize they don't quite align. This wasn't an invention that didn't work, but one that was prone to inaccuracies, required constant human intervention, and was difficult to perfectly calibrate, leading to discrepancies and a general lack of precise universal timekeeping. You shrug, realizing that punctuality in ancient Rome was often more of a suggestion than a strict rule. A common historical fact is that despite the existence of public water clocks, precise, standardized timekeeping for the general populace remained a significant challenge throughout the Roman era. The academic debate continues to analyze the various designs of clepsydrae and their levels of accuracy, emphasizing the perpetual human struggle to conquer and standardize time. You're exploring the more abstract inventions of Roman society now, systems of thought and belief that, while foundational to their culture, often led to practical failures or pervasive frustrations for individuals. We've seen their struggles with knowledge dissemination and engineering challenges. Now, let's consider their social structures and philosophical outlooks, and how these inventions could sometimes fall short of their lofty ideals. Imagine you're a Roman citizen living in the shadow of imperial power. You believe in the concept of Pax Romana, the Roman peace, a period of stability and order ushered in by the empire. You expect, naturally, a world free from major conflict, where trade flourishes and citizens live in security. And for many, in the heart of the empire, this was largely true. But what about its application on the fringes, or for those who resisted Roman rule? You hear whispers of brutal pacification campaigns in distant provinces, of rebellions crushed with overwhelming force, and of entire populations displaced or enslaved. You realize that while Pax Romana brought peace to some, it was often a peace enforced by the sword, and for countless others, it meant subjugation and violence. This wasn't an invention that didn't work, but a political concept that was inherently paradoxical and achieved through immense coercion, failing to deliver universal peace or genuine freedom for all under its umbrella. You feel a chill, realizing that the peace you enjoy comes at a terrible cost to others, a reminder of the often brutal realities behind imperial rhetoric. A common historical fact is that while Pax Romana brought stability, it was maintained through military might and often involved brutal suppression of dissent and expansionist wars. The academic debate still rages about whether Pax Romana was truly a benevolent period or merely a prolonged era of Roman imperial dominance. Let's turn to Roman public health, specifically their general understanding of disease causation. You're thinking of advanced medical knowledge, perhaps even a nascent understanding of hygiene and sanitation. And while they built impressive aqueducts and sewers, their fundamental grasp of why people got sick was largely flawed, leading to ineffective inventions of treatment and prevention. You're observing a Roman family struck by an epidemic. They might attribute the illness to bad air miasma, angry gods, or an imbalance of humors. You see them engaging in rituals, offering sacrifices, or using ineffective herbal remedies based on these flawed understandings. You watch helplessly as the disease spreads, knowing that their efforts are largely futile because they don't understand the true enemy microscopic pathogens. This wasn't a mechanical invention, but an invention of medical theory that was fundamentally incorrect, leading to a general failure in effective public health interventions against infectious diseases. You shiver, imagining the terror of living in a world where unseen forces could strike down entire families, with no real defense. A common historical fact is that despite impressive infrastructure, Roman understanding of infectious diseases was rudimentary, leading to frequent and devastating epidemics. The little-known detail here is that while some individuals observed connections between filth and disease, this rarely translated into widespread, systematic public health policies beyond basic sanitation. The academic debate still discusses the demographic impact of disease on the Roman population, highlighting the constant vulnerability to unseen threats. Now, consider Roman architecture again, specifically their attempts at multi-story apartment buildings, or insula, and their inherent structural and safety issues. You're picturing efficient, high-density housing for the urban masses. And indeed, insulae provided crucial accommodation in overcrowded cities. But the invention here isn't the building type itself, but the often shoddy construction and lack of proper regulation, leading to dangerous living conditions. You're walking past a towering insula, its upper floors leaning precariously, the timber frames creaking under the strain. You hear stories of collapses, of fires sweeping through entire blocks, trapping residents. You realize that while these buildings provided shelter, many were hastily constructed, using inferior materials, and lacked proper foundations or fire breaks. You feel a prickle of anxiety, wondering about the stability of the very ground you're walking on, let alone living in such a structure. This wasn't an invention that didn't work conceptually, but one that was often executed poorly due to economic pressures and a lack of rigorous oversight, resulting in frequent disasters. You crane your neck, looking up at the rickety structure, feeling the fragility of urban life for the common Roman. A common historical fact is that insulae were often poorly built, prone to collapse and devastating fires, leading to significant loss of life. The academic debate continues to explore the regulatory efforts by Roman authorities to curb these dangers, often concluding that they were largely insufficient. Let's delve into Roman social mobility. You're thinking of a society where talent and hard work can lead to advancement, where a skilled freedman might rise to prominence. And indeed, there were examples of social mobility in Rome. But the invention here isn't mobility itself, but the rigid social hierarchies and the often insurmountable barriers that prevented true widespread upward movement for the vast majority of the population. You are a talented artisan, perhaps, or a skilled craftsman, trying to make your way in the world. You work hard, produce excellent goods, but you find that your progress is consistently limited by your birth status. You see positions of power and wealth largely reserved for the aristocratic elite, and even if you accumulate wealth, Gaining true social acceptance or political influence is an uphill battle, often impossible without patronage or manipulation. You feel the weight of invisible chains, the frustration of knowing that your potential is capped not by your ability, but by your lineage. This wasn't an invention that didn't work, but a social system that was designed to maintain existing power structures, making genuine social mobility the exception rather than the rule, leading to widespread frustration and limited opportunities for many. You sigh, looking at the grand villas of the wealthy, knowing that their world is largely closed off to you, despite your best efforts. A common historical fact is that Roman society was highly stratified, with significant barriers to social mobility for the vast majority, particularly slaves and the lower classes. The academic debate still explores the various avenues for social advancement in Roman society, often concluding that while possibilities existed, they were often limited and dependent on specific circumstances or imperial favor. Finally, consider Roman military tactics, specifically their reliance on infantry charges as a primary offensive maneuver. You're picturing disciplined legions, marching forward in a powerful, irresistible wave, smashing through enemy lines, and for a long time, the Roman legionary charge was indeed devastatingly effective. But as military technologies and tactics evolved, this invention of warfare began to show its limitations, especially against different kinds of enemies or in specific terrains. You're on the battlefield, watching Roman legions repeatedly attempt to break through a determined enemy line using their traditional charge. You see them encountering enemies with superior archery, or fighting in difficult, uneven terrain where their rigid formations become vulnerable. You realize that while their discipline is immense, their reliance on a single, powerful hammer blow can be predictable and less effective against agile, unconventional foes. This wasn't an invention that didn't work, but a highly successful tactical invention that became less adaptable and occasionally ineffective against evolving threats or in diverse environments, leading to costly defeats. You wince as a volley of arrows showers down on the advancing legion, realizing that pure frontal assault isn't always the answer. A common historical fact is that while Roman infantry was formidable, they often struggled against highly mobile cavalry, skirmishers, or guerrilla tactics, particularly in later periods. The academic debate continues to analyze the adaptability of Roman military tactics throughout their long history, highlighting the periods where their traditional methods faced significant challenges from new forms of warfare. You're now moving into the more obscure corners of Roman life, uncovering the subtle failures of inventions that, while perhaps minor in the grand scheme, contributed to the daily frustrations and inefficiencies. We've explored their social structures and military limitations. Now, let's consider their attempts at specialized tools and practical solutions that sometimes fell short. Imagine you're a Roman craftsman, perhaps a carpenter, trying to work with various materials. You're thinking of efficient hand tools, precisely made and durable. And while Roman tools were generally robust, certain inventions were surprisingly rudimentary or lacked the precision that would make a craftsman's life easier. Consider the Roman saw. For example, you're trying to cut a straight, clean line through a thick piece of timber. You grip the handle of your bronze or iron saw. You immediately notice that the blades are often thick, lacking the fine set of modern saws, and the teeth are less precisely sharpened. You feel the immense friction, the blade often binding in the wood, requiring significant effort and leaving a rough, uneven cut. This wasn't an invention that didn't work at all, but one that was inefficient and lacked precision, making carpentry a far more laborious and less accurate task than it could have been. You sigh, looking at the jagged edge of your cut, knowing you'll have to spend considerable time planing and smoothing the timber. A common historical fact is that Roman saws, while effective for rough cutting, lacked the advanced metallurgy and tooth design of later saws, limiting their precision. A little-known detail is that saw blades often required frequent resharpening due to the relatively soft metals used, adding to the daily grind of the craftsman. The academic debate still discusses the efficiency of Roman woodworking techniques and the types of timber they preferred, often highlighting the labor-intensive nature of their methods. Let's turn to Roman agriculture again. specifically their attempts at fertilizer application and its inherent limitations. You're thinking of systematic enrichment of the soil to ensure bountiful harvests. And the Romans did understand the importance of manure and crop rotation. But what about the often unscientific and inconsistent application of these methods? You're in a Roman field, watching farmers spreading manure. You notice that the distribution is often uneven, some areas receiving too much, others too little. Furthermore, their understanding of soil chemistry was rudimentary. They didn't know which nutrients specific crops needed most, or how different types of manure varied in their efficacy. You feel the intense, unpleasant odor of the fresh manure, but also the frustration of seeing it applied haphazardly, knowing that the full potential of the soil isn't being realized. This wasn't an invention that didn't work, but an agricultural technique that was applied inconsistently and without precise scientific understanding, leading to suboptimal yields and wasted effort. You shake your head, observing the uneven growth in different parts of the field, realizing that a better understanding of the science would make a world of difference. A common historical fact is that while Roman farmers used various organic fertilizers, their application was often empirical rather than scientific, leading to inefficiencies. The academic debate continues to explore the impact of Roman agricultural practices on soil fertility and environmental degradation, highlighting the limitations of ancient farming methods. Now, consider Roman writing implements, specifically their use of wax tablets for everyday notes and temporary messages. You're picturing a convenient, reusable surface for quick jottings. And for that purpose, they were indeed quite functional. But the invention here isn't the tablet itself, but its inherent impermanence and the limitations it imposed on record-keeping. You take out your wax tablet, inscribed with a stylus. You write down a reminder or a short message. But you realize that the wax surface is easily scratched, smudged, or erased. A sudden bump, a little heat, and your carefully written notes can become an illegible mess. Furthermore, preserving these records for any length of time was difficult. You couldn't simply file them away like paper. You feel a pang of anxiety, wondering if your important reminder will survive the journey home, or if it will be inadvertently wiped clean by jostling in the crowd. This wasn't an invention that didn't work, but a practical tool that was inherently fragile and unsuitable for long-term or secure record-keeping, leading to constant transcription needs or loss of information. You sigh, carefully tucking your tablet away, hoping its contents remain intact. A common historical fact is that wax tablets were widely used for temporary notes, but official and permanent records required more durable materials like papyrus or parchment. The academic debate still explores the various types of Roman writing surfaces and their respective uses, often highlighting the challenges of information storage and retrieval in the ancient world. Let's delve into Roman domestic lighting again, but focus on the invention of oil lamp wicks and their common failings. You might think that a simple wick is hardly an invention that could go wrong, but the quality of wicks had a significant impact on the effectiveness and pleasantness of Roman lighting. You light your oil lamp, expecting a steady flame, but you notice the wick quickly chars, producing excessive smoke and soot. The flame flickers erratically, dimming and brightening, casting dancing shadows that make it difficult to read or work by. You're constantly having to trim the wick or adjust it, just to maintain a halfway decent light. You cough as the black smoke fills the room, staining the walls and irritating your lungs. This wasn't an invention that didn't work, but a crucial component that was often poorly made or inconsistent in quality, leading to smoky, inefficient, and irritating light. You squint, trying to focus on your scroll, feeling the strain on your eyes. A common historical fact is that the quality of lamp oil and wicks varied considerably, with cheaper alternatives often producing more smoke and less light. The academic debate continues to analyze the various types of fuels and wicks used in Roman lamps, and their environmental impact on indoor air quality. Finally, consider the Roman invention of public latrines again, but specifically their heating or lack thereof in colder climates. You're thinking of the relative comfort of their public baths, and might assume similar amenities for their latrines. But this was often not the case. leading to genuinely uncomfortable experiences. You're in a public latrine on a cold winter day. You notice the lack of heating, the biting chill that permeates the stone structure. You shiver as you sit on the cold marble seat, the open design offering no respite from the elements. While the running water system was ingenious, the Romans often didn't extend their hypocaust heating to these public facilities, or the heating was insufficient. This wasn't an invention that didn't work, but a design that failed to adequately consider user comfort in diverse climates, making a necessary daily function a truly unpleasant ordeal in winter. You clench your teeth, enduring the cold, and wishing for a heated outhouse, a concept surely beyond the Roman imagination. A common historical fact is that while some private latrines and bath facilities were heated, public latrines were often unheated, making them uncomfortable in colder seasons. The academic debate still discusses the daily experiences of ordinary Romans in public spaces, often highlighting the disparity between grand public works and individual comfort. You're nearing the end of your journey through the peculiar failures and frustrating realities of ancient Roman inventions. We've seen everything from grand engineering projects that faltered to the simplest tools that just didn't quite hit the mark. Now, let's wrap up by exploring some of the more systemic shortcomings. The inventions of societal structure and philosophical outlook that, while perhaps not physical objects, profoundly shaped and sometimes limited Roman life. Imagine you're a Roman citizen, participating in a public assembly or observing political life. You're familiar with the concept of Roman governance, the invention of the Republic and later the Empire, which offered a seemingly stable and sophisticated system. But what about the underlying corruption and nepotism that often permeated these systems? You're thinking of an ideal political landscape where merit triumphs. Instead, you witness high offices being bought and sold, powerful families dominating elections through patronage and bribery, and personal connections overriding skill or integrity. You see lucrative contracts awarded to relatives, and justice bent by the influence of the wealthy. You feel a deep sense of cynicism, realizing that while the idea of Roman governance was strong, its practical invention was often undermined by pervasive human greed and a lack of accountability. You sigh, watching another unqualified but well-connected individual rise to power, knowing that true public service often takes a back seat to personal gain. A common historical fact is that corruption, patronage, and nepotism were endemic throughout Roman history, often leading to inefficiencies and injustice. The academic debate still rages about the precise economic impact of corruption on the Roman state and its long-term stability. Let's turn to Roman entertainment again, specifically the invention of gladiatorial games and their social implications. You're thinking of thrilling spectacles, courageous fighters, and a release valve for public tension. And indeed, they were immensely popular and provided a brutal form of entertainment. But what about the human cost and the ethical failure of treating human lives as disposable entertainment? You're in the Colosseum, the roar of the crowd deafening. You watch as men, many of them slaves or condemned criminals, are forced to fight to the death for your amusement. You see the casual brutality, the indifference to suffering, and the normalization of violence. This wasn't an invention that didn't work in terms of attracting crowds, but a societal invention that was ethically abhorrent and desensitizing, representing a profound moral failure even as it succeeded as popular entertainment. You feel a knot in your stomach, questioning the very nature of such fun, realizing the barbarity hidden beneath the spectacle. A common historical fact is that gladiatorial games resulted in immense loss of life and were often used by emperors to curry favor with the populace. The academic debate continues to explore the social and psychological functions of gladiatorial combat in Roman society, often highlighting the complex interplay of violence, entertainment, and social control. Now, consider Roman advancements in medicine and public health, but specifically the invention of surgical tools and their practical limitations without anesthesia or modern understanding of sterile technique. You're picturing advanced instruments, capable of complex procedures, and Roman surgeons did possess a surprising array of tools. You're observing a Roman physician attempting a minor surgical procedure, You see the gleaming bronze and iron instruments, but you also witness the agonizing pain of the patient, the lack of any effective pain relief beyond perhaps wine or opium, and the terrifying risk of infection. You smell the blood, the fear, and the pervasive lack of cleanliness. This wasn't an invention that didn't work in terms of design, but a set of tools whose full potential was severely hampered by the absence of foundational medical knowledge, like germ theory and effective pain management, making surgery a brutal and often deadly last resort. You wince, feeling deep sympathy for the patient, realizing that even with the best tools, a Roman operation was a terrifying ordeal. A common historical fact is that while Roman surgeons were skilled, patient survival rates were significantly impacted by pain, shock, and widespread infection due to unhygienic practices. The academic debate still discusses the actual success rates of Roman surgical procedures and their contribution to medical knowledge, often highlighting the chasm between ancient and modern medical capabilities. Let's delve into Roman personal wealth management, specifically the invention of banking and financial systems, and their inherent risks without modern regulations or insurance. You're thinking of secure institutions where you can deposit your money and accrue interest. And Rome did have bankers and rudimentary financial services, but you also hear stories of unscrupulous moneylenders, of banks collapsing due to mismanagement or bad investments, and of fortunes lost in sudden economic downturns with no recourse. You realize that while the concept of banking existed, the practical invention was often unregulated, highly risky, and offered little protection for the average depositor. You feel a surge of anxiety, knowing that your life savings could vanish overnight due to the whims of a dishonest banker or an unforeseen financial crisis. A common historical fact is that Roman financial markets were often volatile and prone to collapses, with little to no state-backed consumer protection. The academic debate continues to explore the sophistication of Roman financial instruments and their overall impact on the Roman economy, highlighting the risks inherent in an unregulated market. Finally, consider the broader Roman invention of imperial expansion and its long-term consequences. You're thinking of glory, wealth, and the spread of Roman civilization. And for centuries, expansion brought immense benefits to Rome. But what about the unsustainability and overstretch that eventually plagued the empire? You look at the vastness of the empire, stretching across continents, and realize the immense logistical burden of maintaining control, suppressing revolts, and defending against external threats across such a sprawling dominion. You see legions stretched thin, resources drained, and the constant need for more taxes and more soldiers. This wasn't an invention that didn't work initially, but one that eventually became unsustainable due to its own success, leading to overextension and internal decay. You sigh, looking at the distant borders, feeling the immense weight of an empire straining under its own vastness, realizing that sometimes too much can indeed be too much. A common historical fact is that the sheer size and complexity of the Roman Empire eventually contributed to its decline, as it became increasingly difficult to administer and defend. The academic debate still rages about the primary causes of the fall of Rome, but overextension and the challenges of managing such a vast invention are almost always key factors.